So there will forever be an ongoing battle about speaker cables or just home theater cables in general on how much or how little you should spend. Some people spend thousands of dollars on speaker cables, and for me, I'll never do it because I don't understand it, but some people swear by it, right? So there forever will be a battle on speaker cables and how much you should spend on them. But there is one cable in your system that I think is far more important than people may look at, and that is your speaker wire. In this video today, we're going to talk about speaker wire, different types of speaker wire, and why you may have the wrong type in your home theater right now. So we all pretty much know what speaker wire does. It's the strand of copper that sends signal from your amplifier to your speakers. It's what brings the power to your speakers so that you have an audible sound, movies and music in this case. And so that speaker wire plays an important role. Depending on the type of wire, there may be a lack of power by the time it reaches from amplifier to your speaker. Or maybe you're suffocating your sound quality because of the speaker you chose and maybe even the size, right? So there's more than just speaker wire. It's not just one type of speaker wire. There is a cheaper type of wire, and then there is a more expensive type of wire. And what I'm talking about is copper wire. OFC stands for oxygen-free copper versus CCA, which is copper-clad aluminum. You want to go for the OFC wire. And what's the difference? OFC wire does cost you more, but not by a lot. And the benefits of it far outweighs the price difference. OFC wire, or oxygen-free copper, which you can find in speaker wire, in RCA cables, and some of the alike, right? It's so much more efficient on sending that signal, sending that power from amplifier to its destination, and in this case, speakers. It is very much better at doing it than CCA wire. CCA wire is a little bit thinner, less strands of wire inside the coat, and it typically costs less too. So that's why people like it. But it is not as good as OFC wiring because it is typically thicker, of course, oxygen free, 99% oxygen free, and it's so much more efficient at sending power to your speakers, especially at long distances. Now let's say your receiver is inside like an entertainment cabinet and your speakers are maybe 3 feet from your amplifier. Well, you may not see any benefits from upgrading from CCA to OFC wiring. But if you have your amplifiers in a closet and your speakers are 10, 20, 30 feet away from your source, that's when you want your OFC wiring, because it's going to be 25 or 30% better at making sure that your signal and your power is making it to its destination. The longer the run of wire, the less power makes it. So let's say the light. I try so hard to be professional. I've been doing this for 4 years. Why can't I just be professional? Only my light is a light that goes off in the middle of the video. Only my channel. Only my channel. Let's say you have a 100 watt receiver, right? So your amplifier is giving 100 watts to your speakers, but by the time it reaches your destination, it's maybe more like 95 watts or 90 watts. If you have OFC wiring, you have a better chance of getting all that power to your speakers. So generally, you want to spend a little bit more and grab yourself some OFC wiring so that you can ensure that the hard-earned money you spend on your amplifiers, all that power is making it to where it needs to go. Now, OFC wiring, of course, as we know now, is better than CCA wiring, and you can find what type of wiring you are using if you take a look at the specs when you're purchasing your wire. But it doesn't just stop there. It's not just about going to OFC wiring. It's also about picking the right gauge wire. When I say gauge wire, it means how sizable is the copper inside. So typically, the higher the number of gauge, the smaller the wire is. So if you have 16 gauge and you buy 18 gauge, then you just shrunk your size, 28, 22, 24, whatever. As you get higher in number, your gauge is actually smaller. As you get lower in number, your gauge is actually thicker. So for me personally, I recommend, unless you're using little tiny satellite speakers, which usually take 18 gauge, 20 gauge wire, I recommend using no less than 14 or 16 gauge. And again, that helps get all that information to your speakers. The thicker the gauge, the more strands of wire that's inside, so more power can be sent through that wire. Now, gauge means a lot in speaker wire. If you buy speaker wire that is too small and you have a very powerful amplifier, well, you can cause yourself a fire. If you send too much information, too much power through that small little wire, it can heat up over time and it can melt. And depending on how you have your system, all the wires behind your receiver, wires going through the floor or a wire track, it can heat up. And if it gets hot enough, it can start a fire. So you want to make sure you have a gauge thick enough so that you can ensure that you have enough power. Me personally, I run 12 gauge wire in my home theater, and it is OFC wiring. You can go thicker, but really receivers and amplifiers in home theater don't really get that powerful. So you don't need much more than 12 gauge. It'll be far more than enough to send any amplifier's power in the home theater world. Car audio is a little bit different. In my car audio system, I run 4 gauge speaker wire to my subwoofer because I'm sending 5,000 watts of power through 2 4 gauge leads, a negative and a positive, plugged to my subwoofer. So to get all of that power, I need a thick wire. And yes, it is OFC wiring. So whether you're in car audio or you're in home audio, the wire makes a difference. You want OFC wiring, oxygen-free copper. Yes, it costs more, but it's worth it. And if you're in home theater, you want at least 12 to 14 gauge minimum if you're running like bookshelf speakers or tower speakers. If you have satellite speakers or Atmos speakers in the ceiling or ceiling speakers or wall speakers in general, maybe you can get away with 16 or 18. If you have a home theater in a box, typically they provide you with wire, and honestly, it's sufficient enough. It'll do the job. But if you're upgrading to something more stout, like a tower speaker or a big bookshelf speaker, anything 80 watts or more, you're going to want 14, 16, maybe even 12 gauge wire to power those speakers with. Now, this is pretty much where I want to end the video. OFC wiring is the way to go. Make sure your gauge is thick enough. And then we can kind of get into the fact of there's different types of cables, like braided cables, twisted cables, whatever, shielded cables. They all do a certain thing to enhance the signal coming through that speaker wire. So for me personally, I have braided OFC 12 gauge wire, and they have banana plugs on the end. They're not very expensive. I got them from Amazon, from Gearit. They are 12 gauge, $36 for like 50 feet or 30 feet, something like that. So not a bad price for a spool of 12 gauge OFC wiring. They come in a sleeve. They're nice and packaged well. They look attractive for what wires, however good wires can look, they look good, I guess. So I know that the signal coming from my Monoprice Monolith 7, 200 watts at 8 ohms, like 300 watts at 4 or 6 or whatever. There's a lot of power coming through it. I know for sure that it's making it to my speakers, or enough of it is making to my speakers that I shouldn't have a problem when I turn my volume up. So you can get OFC wiring, 12 gauge, 14 gauge, 16 gauge. Make sure that it's a good gauge for your home theater. Make sure that it's, I guess you can get twisted or braided if you want to, but the most important thing is to make sure you get OFC wiring. Make sure it's thick enough to send the signal throughout your room, especially if you have long runs. So with that being said, guys, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what wire you have. Why did you pick it? Did you just buy some off the shelf and say it'll work? Or did you actually go out and do some research before you bought it? Let me know down below in the comment section. Hit that like button and subscribe if you are not already. We will see you guys in the next video. Kpaceguy out. Peace.
You can say I lost my mind. I will keep on holding my head high, even if the sky is falling down.